morning, people. Welcome back to F Politics. Do you want to know what the Reform Party is really about? Well, I went to one of their rallies, one of their less publicly advertised rallies, to find out what they really think. And I spoke to some of their candidates, and I got pretty much everything you'd ever want to know about what that party really stands for. And you'll learn 3 things from this video. 1, that they are deliberately planning to make us poorer for decades. 2, that they are actively hostile towards the very concept of equality for marginalized groups and social justice. 3, they do not like being scrutinized by the press. So where do we start? Well, the Reform Party was originally created as the Brexit Party. Brexit is their literal reason for being, and yet they keep saying
we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically. Brexit has failed.
So if Brexit is the central policy of their party and they keep saying that it's failed, the question is, how would they do it differently? And so I spoke to Ben Habib, the deputy leader of their party.
How would you change Brexit in order to solve the issues about the 56% of UK businesses that say Brexit has made it harder for them to trade? How would you solve those problems?
I would rip up the trade and cooperation agreement and the withdrawal agreement. I'd take Northern Ireland back into the United Kingdom. I would deregulate business. I would get rid of the net zero nonsense, which is absolutely killing our economy.
Okay, so
I would cut taxes
then.
on. I would
so
cut
no deal Brexit then.
Absolutely no deal. The best deal
even though the majority of British businesses say Brexit has made things harder, you'll make things even harder.
The main bit of damage that Brexit has done to our economy is because the rules for products in the UK are no longer the same as the rules for products in the EU. So now when products cross between the UK and the EU, there's paperwork and checks to make sure that those products are okay to sell, which adds costs. Now that's bad enough because that's just the practical consequences of what happens when you take back control of your laws. But with Brexit, we did negotiate a free trade deal with the EU, so in principle, there are no tariffs, basically a tax on products, that we sell between the two of us. But here, Ben Habib, the deputy leader of the Reform Party, is saying that their official policy is to go for no deal. He said that no deal was always the best deal. And if there was no deal between the UK and the EU, then under World Trade Organization rules, the EU would be forced to put tariffs on pretty much all products that we sell to them. So objectively, it is the Reform Party's policy to make the damage of Brexit significantly worse. So I spoke to some other Reform Party candidates about whether or not they were okay with taking the UK economy from bad to worse. Now with the first guy I spoke to, you can almost see the battle in his head between, oh crap, he's probably right, Brexit probably is damaging the country, and I probably shouldn't admit that on camera though.
But 56% of UK businesses say that Brexit has made it harder for them to trade. So how would you resolve that?
That also depends which 56% of businesses you're talking to, because I also trade with the EU in my business. I don't have a problem.
Well, the British Chamber of Commerce, they surveyed UK businesses, and you've got the Small Business Federation that says that 70% of the members have found it harder to trade. You've also got the Food and Drink Association, which is responsible for UK food production. They said that Brexit has made it more expensive. So how would you resolve those issues?
The only evidence I've found of it being more expensive is by the inflation that we've had in the economy anyway, and wage increases and fuel duty increases. None of that is anything at all to do with Brexit. It's to do with worldwide forces.
So the added paperwork at the border, the massive factories, warehouses that have had to be created that do customs checks and paperwork, that hasn't added any cost to UK trade.
I'm not saying it hasn't added a cost.
So Brexit has.
There is nothing wrong with having a border.
Okay.
And look at the cost that's been added to the country by us not having an immigration border.
But as far as trade, you do admit that Brexit has damaged trade. So my question is, how would you solve those problems?
I have not agreed that. You don't put words into my mouth. At no point did I say that I'd agree.
You said there'd be a cost. I asked you, has the extra paperwork
There's always a
cost?
cost to doing business, no matter what you do.
Okay.
But
those costs wouldn't be there without Brexit. And given that the original Brexit policy of the Reform Party was a no-deal Brexit, is that something you'd still pursue now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so even more trade barriers.
Any trade tariffs that are added to our goods leaving, if added on the return, would
increase food prices here.
It would, but it hasn't.
But it has.
No. The whole world has had price increases, not just us. And that's to do with the war in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with Brexit.
So the Food and Drink Association is wrong when it says that Brexit has increased food prices?
Yes.
Food and Drink Association is wrong?
I think so, yes.
Understood. Thank you very much, sir.
Just so we're clear, his plan there is to do a no-deal Brexit that would force the EU to put tariffs on everything we sell to them, and then we would put tariffs on everything the EU sells to us, which would raise food prices here in the UK. And despite the Food and Drink Association saying that Brexit has already increased the cost of food production here in the UK, he's saying that that's not true. He knows better than the people who actually make our food. But I did speak to a Reform Party candidate who was a bit more honest about the damage they're doing to us.
We also need to support every business. So there's always going to be a trade-off with positives and negatives. And I don't think any government has truly got behind Brexit. I don't think the EU's behind Brexit, so I think they're trying to make it more difficult for us for obvious reasons.
So you do acknowledge that Brexit has made it harder for us to trade with the EU because of the extra red tape and paperwork?
Only because of the EU.
But
the EU
but if you take Brexit out of the equation, that wouldn't happen. So without Brexit, that wouldn't be there.
It's also sometimes you have to take you have to swallow your medicine to get better in the future. So this is maybe a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan.
So we won't get the benefits of Brexit for another 20 years? It's already been 8. The average age of a Brexit voter was about 60, 65. Are you doing the maths here?
Understood. And given that the original Brexit Party policy was a no-deal Brexit, Ben Habib over there just said that you want to go for no deal again. Under international law, the EU would be forced to put tariffs on all UK products. Would you think that would make things better or worse?
It might be worse for some in the short term, but it's just like dealing with Europe like we would do with any other country. It's just a level playing field for every country. Maybe, yes, we had benefits with EU, but the days of dealing with the EU were before e-commerce, etc., when it was an advantage in the 70s and 80s. Now with e-commerce we can trade so quickly internationally. The benefits of the EU don't necessarily hang true anymore.
Unfortunately, we haven't developed to the point where food can be delivered digitally, food has gotten more expensive because of the extra trade barriers.
But the customs clearance, the trade can actually be done electronically. So there's lots of work to be done.
So once again, just like with the border in Northern Ireland, you have Brexiteers claiming that technology will someday save them. But it carries on.
But ultimately, in the long term, we're always going to end up doing most of our trade with the countries that are physically closest to us, i.e. the EU. And if all the other countries have no barriers to trade and we have barriers to trade, does not put us at a disadvantage?
But maybe, who knows, in the future, the EU could break up and then we could deal directly with France and deal directly with Germany, and maybe it's all broken down.
So the success of Brexit depends on the EU solving?
No, it's about actually meeting in the middle. It's about actually having thesis, antithesis and synthesis in the middle.
But we did get onto the idea of rejoining the EU, so going back on Brexit.
For what it is, and the agreement is done. We can't go back on it. We need to move forward.
Why can't we? Given that all the polls suggest that the majority of people would vote to rejoin, why can't we rejoin the EU?
Well, now you see, because we're now believing in polls, and at this time of the election we don't always believe in polls, do we?
Even if we didn't use current polls and simply looked at the age split of who voted for Brexit in 2016, we are now in a place where, demographically speaking, we are a Remain supporting country.
Maybe, but then maybe if you did that poll again in 2 years, it could be different if we had a different government.
But based on what you just said, we wouldn't really see the benefits for quite some time.
Yes.
So we're going to keep getting poorer because of Brexit. So it's unlikely that those polls would shift in favour of it.
But you say we're getting poor because of Brexit. We're getting poor for a variety of reasons, of which Brexit is one.
So while the previous Reform Party candidate did go back on the idea of Brexit making us poor, this one is fully committing to it.
And also in other businesses I work with, the only difference in Brexit is they've had to file now some customs paperwork. So they've had to employ maybe more people. Mm-hmm. So sometimes Brexit's actually created jobs because of the additional administration dealing with Europe. Because people are still trading and traffic is still moving between us and Europe and vice versa. It's just that there's some extra administrative functions that have to go on. Just the same as if we have to export and import with Australia, America,
which makes
Africa.
Supply chains more expensive, and given that we rely on the supply chains for things like food, that ultimately ends up hurting us.
Yes, but now what we want to do is support farmers. So instead of relying on 50% imports, we actually want to increase local produce to 70+%, so that we are self-sustaining and we're not relying on so many imports.
So even though we currently rely on the EU for about a third of our food, their plan is to make the UK self-sufficient, so we don't need the EU's imports. So I figured I'd dig into that with the next guy.
I mean, one of the most ridiculous things was, I was saying, shortage of, let's say, tomatoes or whatever. Well, I think we can do without tomatoes. We can actually do without the EU. That's what it's about.
Okay, so
but they've not had the opportunity to do it.
So given that a third of our food is imported from the EU, you're saying we can just become self-sufficient, we don't need that?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be self-sufficient as a country.
How long do you reckon it will take until we actually got self-sufficient, so we wouldn't actually rely on that trade with the EU?
we've got to encourage people, haven't we? We've got to stop importing.
5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Who knows? I'm not in the farming industry.
Okay, but I mean, there would definitely be a gap between a no-deal Brexit as proposed by the Reform Party and however long it takes for us to get that. So in that time, we'd have made food significantly more expensive before we can actually make our own.
Sometimes you have to take a little pain with some things for it to work.
So based on what you've seen, I've already proven to you that it's the official policy of the Reform Party to pursue a no-deal Brexit, which they know will make the people of the UK poorer and hungrier for decades. All that was left was to get some of the big names like Lee Anderson and Widdecombe to admit that, and I tried.
They're trying to shield me. I'm a member of the press. They've seen my press pass and they're trying to shield me. Miss Widdecombe, do you accept that a no-deal Brexit would force the EU to put tariffs on UK products?
Sorry, I haven't a clue what you've just asked me.
Miss Widdecombe, do you accept that?
What you're hearing there is my audio completely disconnects as I tried to get round the Reform Party henchmen. And then with Lee Anderson.
Sir, do you accept that a no-deal Brexit would lead to tariffs on UK products? Force the EU to put tariffs on UK products?
Excuse me.
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, do you accept that a no-deal Brexit would force the EU to put tariffs on UK products? Do you accept that, sir? A no-deal Brexit would force the EU to put tariffs on UK products? Sir? Sir? Yes or no?
When they left, often
You still believe that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists?
And because of that,
Here I am outside the Reform Party rally in Stafford, and I've just been kicked out because I was trying to interview Lee Anderson and he got a whole bunch of his heavies to try and get out of the way, and a woman decided to walk in front of me whilst I was doing that in order to separate the two of us, and they used that as a pretext to kick me out, despite me having this is the press pass they gave me, but also my own official one. I should probably give that back, to be fair. But yeah, that's the attitude this party has, or business has, to free speech. Kicking out journalists who try to interview their politicians. They're only sitting politician, asking polite questions, but apparently that's not okay for them. If they ever get near power, expect more of the same.
And the funny thing is, even though their excuse for kicking me out was that I supposedly bruised the arm of a Reform Party official, do you know who helped prove that that wasn't true? Lee Anderson. He tweeted a video that not only shows her deliberately walking into me, but it also shows him pushing me out of the way. Because the thing is, these people claim to be all about free speech, but they don't actually like free speech at all, unless it's their speech. Like when I was trying to interview Ben Habib, one of his people put his hand in front of my camera.
Would you support a no-deal Brexit? So all the tariffs the EU would be forced to put on UK products. Do you support that happening?
Femi, I'm not
even
going to get...
Even though the majority of British businesses say Brexit...
I'm not going to get into a hypothetical discussion with you.
So
even
though the majority of British businesses say Brexit has made things harder for them to trade...
Femi, go back to London, enjoy the sun.
I live in Birmingham.
So we are talking literally censoring the press. And they've always been like this. Back in 2019, I bought a ticket for a Brexit Party event, and they revoked my ticket before I even turned up, and they sent the police on me.
Could you explain again why I'm...
Yeah, it's a private site, a site to which you don't have a right access. Just like your house,
even though I have a ticket.
That can be revoked at any time, sir. It has been revoked. So if you come with, because of the nature of the t-shirt you're wearing, sir.
No, it was revoked before I wore the ticket.
Well, I'm telling you, sir, it's been revoked. Your right on site has been revoked. I'm asking you to leave, sir. You're now a trespasser on site.
And again, the Reform Party is the same party as the Brexit Party. They simply changed the name, and they're hoping all of us are too stupid to pay attention. Okay, so we've established that the Reform Party plans to make us poor, that they're hostile towards anybody that dares to call them out for that. But what are their values? I'm sure you've seen the stories about the Reform Party candidates that, for example, praised Hitler. So what do you reckon they say about that behind closed doors?
As you know, there's a lot of scrutiny that comes with putting your name on that ballot paper. Anything you might have said in innocent company, not knowing how it was going to be taken out of context later, will be taken out of context. People think I want to drown people in the channel. I mean, that's absolutely absurd.
Absurd, you say? But isn't this literally you?
That we could, as an idea, provide them with another dinghy into which to climb and then go back to France. And if they choose to scupper that dinghy, then yes, they have to suffer the consequences of their actions.
Then you would leave them to drown?
They cannot, absolutely, they cannot be infantilized to the...
See, the Reform Party is trying to downplay the overt racism that clearly exists within a lot of their members, which is why some of their followers are shocked to hear how bad it is. Now, this one person that I spoke to, she went off on one about Kehinde Andrews, an anti-racist professor, and so I couldn't help myself.
If he were to call the Reform Party rooted in racism, he'd be wrong.
Absolutely.
The co-founder of the Brexit Party, which is now the Reform Party, i.e. the place where we are now, was a woman called Catherine Blakelock.
Okay.
And she once said that black people were inherently violent because they have excess testosterone.
That is ridiculous. And I think what's happened is there's been a whole load of people flooded into the party.
Oh no, she created the party.
Oh, she created the party?
Yeah, she's a co-founder.
Okay, I don't know much about her, but I would say that these people need to be up for scrutiny, and if they're inappropriate, they need to be kicked out.
And Lee Anderson has just taken the stage over there. He said that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists because he supports Palestine. Do you support that kind of rhetoric, or do you think that's divisive?
I think that he misspoke.
And no, I'm not giving her the benefit of the doubt. Ignorance is no defense, because Ben Habib was very, very clear about what that party stands for, or rather against.
Woke is part of this globalist agenda. It's part of this pro-immigration policy. And the way that woke has been created is through the passing of regulations and laws that in the end promote ethnic minorities, religious minorities, minority sexual preferences, and then the whole transgender ideology lot. Promote them over and above, and if necessary, and more often than not, to the detriment of the majority. That is what woke is.
He is literally saying that fighting for the rights of minority groups is a threat to straight white Christian Brits.
Woke is racist. DEI is racist. It's prejudiced. And when I was brought up, I was taught at school that everyone was equal.
And that gets a clap.
Isn't it amazing that I get a clap for saying that everyone's equal? That our society has been so damaged that in itself is now some kind of thing worthy of celebrating.
See, this is how fascists get away with it. They pretend that everybody's already treated equally, so that they don't have to do anything to help those who are suffering from discrimination.
Martin Luther King got it. You know, it's not the colour of your skin that matters, it's the content of your character. We've moved away from that.
Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream that one day my little daughters will be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their characters." He wasn't saying that that was the case back then. Like, do these people genuinely believe that Martin Luther King was like, yeah, equality is pretty fine right now, so just stop talking about how black people and white people are treated differently? I mean, he must believe that at least his followers believe that, because he then goes on to name all the ways that he plans to get rid of anything that is aimed at achieving equality.
Get rid of diversity, equality and inclusion, ban it, repeal the Equalities Act, repeal Section 172 of the Companies Act. It put an obligation in on companies to promote social justice. Companies are not moral creatures. Companies are purveyors and creators of wealth.
I mean, tell me you're the bad guys without telling me you're the bad guys. And then he gets on to what he plans to teach our kids in terms of history, for example.
If we are not proud of our history, we cannot be proud ourselves. We cannot get up every morning in the way that I said and punch the air and think we're glad to be alive. We did not make our wealth off the slave trade. As the most powerful nation in the world, we banned the slave trade.
You know, personally, and this is just me, if I'd killed and enslaved millions of people for 400 years and then I suddenly stopped, I wouldn't be looking for a medal. And this bit was also weird.
We've got to teach religious studies with a Christian prism.
They're saying this stuff with their whole chest. Like, yeah, we'll teach about religion as long as it's Christian religion.
Did you know that St. Paul's Cathedral had Winston Churchill down as a white supremacist? St. Paul's Cathedral. It's critical that we go back to understanding that this man was one of the greatest Britons, if not the greatest Briton that ever lived.
Winston Churchill literally said that nothing wrong was done to the indigenous of Australia and America because a higher grade race, a more worldly wide race, a superior race came in and took their place. That is the definition of white supremacy. For all these people talk about protecting our history, they're the ones rewriting it. So the main message that I got from the Reform Party, directed mainly at white people, was you are better than everybody else, you should punch the air and be proud of your history, but you're also a victim because the woke people are going to put the minorities over and above you, and you should focus on that, not the fact that we're deliberately making you poorer, and anybody that questions us, we'll literally silence them. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.
It's no surprise we didn't get Brexit. None of them believe in the United Kingdom. Not the Conservative Party, not the Labour Party. Neither stand for British interests. They are both anti-British, and it has to be said. If we have a human rights dispute in this country, it is determined by the European Court of Human Rights in their sole discretion. There is no law on which they rely to reach their judgments. They're governed by a set of conventions, 16, 17, 18 conventions, which date back to 1946. Okay? They're not fit for purpose.